Alrighty.
All right.
Thank you. And let me just get my screen up. Oh, you need to let me share my screen.
Yep. Oh, the joys of learning. Do. All right. Now you should be able to share, and I am going to mute everybody, okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Let us enter the cone of silence. Just remember to unmute yourself, Liz, because I think it might affect you too. All right, here we go.
Thank you for the reminder because, yeah, I would not have noticed. All right. There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Family Learning in Museums. I am Liz Diaruda, and I am the Supervisor of Interpretation and Family Learning. I started here in 2006 as a part-time interpreter. It was my third job that I had at the time. And in 2009, I applied for the job of supervisor. And my responsibilities have changed slightly over the years, but I have been in this position ever since. This picture is my niece and nephews modeling family learning for you guys in the Children's Museum. This was taken many years ago. They have been coming here since they were little bitty guys. Okay, so why is it important to talk about family learning in museums? Family groups are a large percentage of who visits museums. Museums provide immersive learning experiences, inspire imagination, and offer a unique environment for building memories with family. We learn through group interaction, and families are our first group. Our families are our first teachers. They introduce us to the world. And museums are centers for family learning. The training that we're doing today is based on material that was produced in 2008 through 2012 through a collaboration between Boston Children's Museum and Chicago Children's Museum, thanks to support from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, IMLS. It was created to support staff and volunteers who work directly with visitors in museums. This training focuses on family learning and on skills that will allow you guys to do better to meet the needs of visiting children and their caregivers. So, what is the definition of family? For our training purposes today, the term family includes all intergenerational groups that visit museums. Any group that includes children and adult caregiver, parents and grandchildren, or parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, nannies, neighbors, teachers, and children. Our training today will cover 10 standards of engagement. These are basic principles that define what skills and concepts you will need for family learning to thrive in a museum setting. These standards were developed using research on family learning in museums and validated through evaluation and testing at the Boston Children's Museum and the Chicago Children's Museum. We will discuss each one of these individually, and we will stop briefly after each one if you guys have any questions. So first we have ourselves as invitation. We provide inclusive physical and verbal cues that let visitors know we are approachable and knowledgeable about the museum, its philosophy, exhibits, and programs. Research suggests that assessments of people and situations are often made in 2 seconds and sometimes instantaneously. So what could that mean for our interactions with visitors? It means that our first words, and more likely our first actions or even postures, will signal to our visitors whether they are welcome or not in our exhibit. The cues that we give families are the first things they will notice and could influence the entire experience that follows and even their entire visit. A welcoming staff member will invite families in and make them feel comfortable. A dour or closed-off staff member will send exactly the message we do not want to send, that they are not welcome or that they are bothering us. This isn't to say that we all have to be bubbly and overly happy at all times. That's impossible. Disingenuous cheer can actually have the opposite effect of what's intended. The key to being inviting is being yourself. Be warm, smile when appropriate, and welcome visitors to the space. This training was also set up at a time when we weren't wearing masks. So smiling is a big part of making people feel welcome. I do believe that when you smile, it can be seen in your eyes, but it's also appropriate to wave as well. Body language can say as much as your first words to a family. Remember that especially with child visitors, this may be their first ever museum experience. So you are setting the bar for them. Set it high. How? Learn about the programs, activities, special events that are being offered on the days that you're here, and be ready to share that information with visitors. Extra credit if you can suggest programs based on the age and/or interest of the child. When you sign in at the nav station in the morning, check to see if the day's events are listed. The visitor services supervisors print out what we call a today sheet every day, listing what is going on. If you arrive before the sheet has made its way to the nav station, you can check in with one of us to find out what's going on. Either give us a call, stop us if you see us on grounds, or when we come in to say good morning. It's important to know what activities are happening. It's also important to interact with caregivers and children from the moment that they arrive in your exhibit. Notice I use the word interact instead of engage. That was intentional. There are often times that you will be engaging with visitors with when a family arrives. You can still take a moment to make eye contact and smile. Smiling is the universal way to show approachability. It doesn't need translation. Acknowledge each member of the group, whether it be with a verbal greeting or a smile that lets them know you see them. Smiling while wearing a mask may seem irrelevant, but a heartfelt smile can be seen in your eyes. And again, it wouldn't hurt to add in a small wave, just in case. When you are in an exhibit, you should look like you are happy to be there, and hopefully you are, and that you are engaged. Again, this doesn't mean you have to be super bubbly all the time. But if you are here, you're here and you're on. Everyone has bad days, but the visitor should never know that. If you need to step away, please reach out to one of us. We're always happy to help. So, remember, some families are comfortable in museums, others are not. We strive to ensure that all families feel welcomed and comfortable in our museum. Everyone has different styles, strengths, and preferences. There are many ways to be inviting and approachable. And with that being said, we're going to do a quick activity about starting the conversation with visitors in your exhibit. So what I'd like to do is have you look at the 3 scenarios that I've presented, choose one, and come up with a way to break the ice in that scenario with the visitors. And then we can share. So I think I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to work on this, starting now. Okay, time is up. So, let's see. Number 1. A child is working on a puzzle, but is clearly struggling. His mother is standing not too far away, but offering no help. Does anybody have something they'd like to share about this one?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Gina, I would get down to their level, just kneeling, not on the ground, but just kneel, make eye contact. Enthusiastically, I would say, I would guide them and I would say, let me help you. And then I would say, let's try this piece. Maybe this one will work here. And engage them with kindness and love.
Great. Thank you. Great way to show by example, engage with the child. Does anybody else have an answer for this one?
So this is Marilyn.
Hi,
I
Marilyn.
think I would approach the mother first
Mhm.
because there may be a good reason why she's standing not too far away and not offering help at the time.
Mhm.
Maybe that the child does need some, maybe she understands that the child needs to build their own confidence on things.
Mhm.
But so I would engage the mother first and then make sure that it's okay
Right.
to work with the child.
Yep. There's different ways to engage. Does anybody else have something for this one?
This is Eileen. I might say that, oh my gosh, I have so much trouble with this puzzle too. But I've been looking at it for a long time, and I know that if you look at another green piece that matches this green piece, it might fit together. Do you see anything here that would be a solution?
Great. Okay. So let's move on to the second one. A father with 2 children is having a difficult time as one child is running around in circles screaming and the other is laughing at her. Does anybody have some insight into this one?
I find this is a tough one.
It is a tough one.
You don't want to send the father and kids out. You don't want to
Nope.
embarrass.
Correct.
So I would probably engage the 2 kids.
Mhm.
Talk to the one who's running around and to the other one who's laughing. Ask them, what's so funny about your sister? And try to redirect them. And then bring in the father once the kids have calmed down or we've got them redirected so that he's part of the group now,
Mhm.
moving into the exhibit.
Great. Right. You brought up some really good points. You never want them to feel like they're doing something bad, and you don't want to embarrass them. So it's always a good idea to engage and distract and redirect children. Does anybody else want to take?
Yes,
Okay.
I agree with Brian. I also found this the most difficult of the 3 scenarios. And in thinking about it, I think I would try to engage, particularly the child that was screaming, try to distract her in a playful way or a surprising way to have her stop screaming. Once you've engaged her that way, then you can begin to include primarily the children.
Mhm.
And I agree on the first issue, I agree completely with Marilyn about somehow you have to engage the mom in that. And you can do that. I would think you could do that by engaging with the child and trying in some way to acknowledge the mother's response to your attempting to engage.
Absolutely. By reading her body language and just paying attention to the cues that she's giving. Right. Anybody else? Okay. Number 3, the family arrives early for a demonstration happening in your exhibit and are getting restless waiting for it to start.
This is Marilyn. I would approach them and ask them where they're from and what are they most interested or most looking forward to seeing at the museum, and tell them a few things that they shouldn't miss while they're visiting.
Great.
I'd also ask them what they've seen already, what they've liked already.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, at Schaefer, we have props we use. So if they're waiting, we can talk about the demonstration to come and use the props
Right.
to show what's going to happen in terms of bending the frames.
Right. Yep. Good idea.
I had this situation with a group of school kids on the Conrad. The dead horse demonstration was late, and the kids were getting antsy because they knew it was the dead horse, and they came specifically for that. So I told them a little bit about why the dead horse and kind of get them prepped or excited about the demonstration, even though it was late.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point, Brian. It's important to know what is happening in your exhibit every day. If there's a demonstration or activity happening, even if you're not the one facilitating it, it's still important to know what's going to happen so that you can talk to people about it.
Could I just jump in here for a second too?
Absolutely.
I think kind of relating to that a bit, my experience both as a professional and now as a parent is that any kind of uncertainty for a family kind of breeds anxiety. So I find that if a family arrives early for a program, if I can give them a very precise sense of how long they have to wait, I'm like, it'll be just 5 minutes, you know, or it'll be 4 minutes and then he'll open the door. That usually helps. But if I make a vague time reference, that's no good. Like, it'll be just a moment. That doesn't usually cut it for a family that's getting antsy.
Right. Yep.
Specificity always helps.
Thanks, Eric. Does anybody else have something they want to add? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this, the first topic?
I would want to say one thing about.
Sure.
I picked up something from Disney training, and one was that the people were guests, and the other was whatever your role was, you were considered on stage, so you were always, in effect, part of the exhibit or part of the environment that you were in. And I found that's been, thinking that way has been helpful. That I'm an extension of the exhibit, so when I'm making initial contact with people, I want to invite them in, and I don't want them to look at me or look through me as, well, I'm just standing here as a demonstrator or as a quasi guard. I'm here as their greeter and their guide.
Great. I absolutely agree. Disney has stellar customer service training. And I love the idea of thinking of our visitors as our guests and treating them that way. So thank you. If there's no more questions or comments.
So
yes.
Coming back to the most challenging of the second one.
Yes.
Right? So we're in one of the interior spaces and the child's screaming is not only difficult for the father, but disruptive for the other visitors, our other guest. What's our responsibility to get the kid to shut up?
Well, it's not necessarily our responsibility to get them to shut up. We want them to calm down. And we actually are going to talk about helping caregivers deal with difficult situations in a further topic. But in some cases like this, maybe the caregiver just needs a different space. So we can suggest to them places that might be a little more quiet and calm. Maybe we can offer them, if you know, a tissue, a place where the child, if it's because maybe the child jumped in a puddle and they're wet, that they could find, you know, towels or where the bathrooms are, really just helping them figure out what they need so that they can get that. Usually we can work through it. It's not very often that we have a completely out of control child that is just disruptive, because parents recognize a lot of times, you know what, this isn't going to end, so we need to remove the child from the space.
My experience, I've had this a couple of times in the drugstore, and the play boats have been a wonderful
Yes.
distraction, as has the children, because usually the children are bored, and those have been wonderful tools in my back pocket to say, you know, I bet she would enjoy the play boats.
Absolutely, and that is also something I use. If sometimes, even if you're in the children's museum and this is happening, the child may just need a place where they could be outside and be able to climb on the boats. And so to just let the parent know that is giving them a way to get out of the space without it being embarrassing.
And I would just add, you know, Dave, I think that's a really good tactic, and I think it's just important to point out that your phrasing there that you use is very carefully chosen, and I think is good, because the way you present it is, it's a friendly suggestion, as opposed to saying like, you really shouldn't be here, you should be over there instead. and that's a subtle but important difference in messaging.
Great. Thank you. All right. Next topic, fun. Speaking of Children's Museum, this is my niece stuck in a bucket. So for fun, we create a playful climate that is conducive to fun, whatever that means to our individual visitors. Play is the work of a child. It may seem cliche, but it couldn't be more true. It is too easy to expect adult behavior and decorum from children, and we too easily forget our own childhood. What looks at first glance to some as trivial is actually a child creating understanding, synaptic connections, and theories about the world and how it works. Encouraging children to actively play may seem to some out of place in a museum. And it is true that there are some spaces that do not lend themselves to boisterous play for the safety of both the visitor and the artifacts. However, you may have noticed that when children visit, they will engage in playful behaviors, whether you invite them to or not. It is their nature, and it is perfectly natural. You can't and shouldn't fight it. There are ways in which you can leverage the need in children to actively explore their world. And while you're at it, you may just help their adult caregivers remember the joy of discovery through play. How? I'm glad you asked. Let visitors take the lead in what they want to do and how they want to do it. Each child and each adult has his or her own way of having fun. Be engaged and engaging with visitors. Be present in your interactions with them. Show that you are enjoying the process of learning and playing with them. Each of us has our own authentic, playful self that works for us. When appropriate, use props or exhibit elements to invite visitors to approach and play. Obviously, there are restrictions on what a visitor can touch, but make it a point to know that information. Know that if there is something in your exhibit that you can handle, that somebody can touch. And if you think of a touchable object that would enhance the visitor experience in an exhibit, please let us know. If you have a visitor who does not seem to be enjoying themselves, talk with them about their interests and then suggest other exhibits or activities in the museum that they may find more enjoyable. Model ways that grown-ups can have fun. Fun is important to learning in museums. It can make learning more engaging and fun. And yes, what I'm telling you is to have fun. So, does anybody have questions, comments about fun in museums?
I have a question.
Yep.
I had it yesterday, and it continues to be an issue for me. And that is that I don't know anything.
Okay.
You know, I'm in the Schaefer Gallery, for example, and the first day, a gentleman came up to me and asked me a question I had no idea about.
Okay.
So I'm thinking I need more information to share with the visitor.
Yes.
You know, these guidelines are good, but I need information to share.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
So
I'm sure everyone feels that way.
Right.
You know, a gentleman comes up to me and says, gee, how much does a barrel of the whale oil sell for? I'm like, I don't know.
So Barbara, let me tell you right now, there's always going to be questions that you're not going to know the answers to, because people will ask you everything. However, if you find that you're getting a question often that you don't know the answer to, or you just really want some more information, come talk to us. We have the resources, and we are more than happy to show you them, to go over them with you, to share them with you. We have lots of training material here in Brew Salon. We've all been in the exhibits. We oversee the exhibits. So let us know. Reach out to us.
Will do.
Okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I have one question, Liz.
Yes.
I believe that's a picture of your niece.
Yes.
Yeah, did she ever have corrective surgery for her feet being backward?
I was wondering if somebody was going to notice that. She put her own shoes on that day.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
Yep. And she didn't care.
Nope, of course not.
And actually, my sister never noticed. And that will factor into one of the discussions we have later on about families getting to museums and how hard it can be. So, our next topic. Environment is invitation. We create and maintain a physical environment that is comfortable and engaging for both children and adults. Just as with an individual, people will make split-second assessments of the museum environment as soon as they visit it. There are many things in an exhibit space that will signal to families whether this is a space they want to visit or not. Some, I'd say many, of these elements are beyond our control. But there are some things that you can do to make each space in the museum as enticing as possible for families. When you first enter your exhibit for the day, and periodically throughout the day, make sure the space is clean and free of hazards. And this would go for even if you're in an exhibit that doesn't necessarily see a lot of family activity. If something is broken or presents a safety hazard, report it to us immediately. If you are in an exhibit space that has interactives, hands-on activities, games, puzzles, etc., make sure they are kept in order and that the space looks put together and clean. If there's anything broken or missing, let us know, and if possible, remove it. We don't want to have broken games or puzzles out. Listen respectfully and actively to families' opinions or concerns about exhibits or programs, and respond by letting them know they have been heard and you will follow up as needed. This may happen about an exhibit that you don't normally work in, are not in, and has nothing to do with you, but you are the person who is talking to them at that moment. It's important that they feel heard, that they know somebody's listening to them, and that their problem will be addressed. Does anybody have any questions about this one? This one's pretty simple.
So just as a practical matter, if you see something that's broken that you think poses a hazard,
yep.
Pick up your cell phone and call somebody.
Yes.
Pick up a pay. How? Yes. Nuts
Sure.
and bolts. How do you do it? How do you record
Okay.
it?
Yep. Good question. So if your exhibit has a phone, you can call one of the supervisors. And in each exhibit, there should be a handbook. And in the front of the handbook, all of our numbers are listed. And if you're using a phone that's a campus phone, it's just an extension. And so you can call any one of us and leave a message. If it's something that you think poses a danger, an immediate threat, there is an exposed wire, call security. Their extension is also listed. If you don't have a phone in the exhibit, you can use your cell phone. And again, those numbers are all listed in the handbook to let security know that there's a danger. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Great, yep.
And also, when these things happen, in each exhibit, in addition to the handbook, there should be a logbook where you are just, basically it's for taking notes about what happened during the day. And if there's somebody coming in the next day and they need to know something, it's good to write it down there. So say, looking at the Children's Museum has wooden eggs, a dozen of them. We are forever looking for these eggs. So if you close and you spent all this time looking for the eggs and there's still one missing, it's good to let the next person know, cannot find one of the eggs. So they know to look in the morning. Or the Noah's Ark puzzle has been pulled because, you know, part of it is broken. Just so that people know where things are and what's going on.
I've got two remarks about my experience in the, again, most of my experience has been in the drugstore. The Seaport's done an excellent job of making it welcoming to children by putting those steps where they can climb up and see over the counter. It's surprising how many of our spaces are, a child walks in and they, you know, it's like being in a crowded elevator with a bunch of adults. All you see is our knees. And so that's an excellent thing that the Seaport did to make it welcoming. The other was on a safety issue. We had a bench that was sitting in the front area for people to sit on it. And I noticed that one day, one particularly large individual came in and sat on the bench, and the legs sort of began to splay out. And so at that time, I turned the bench so that nobody could sit on it, and then notified security. And they it was taken care of right away.
Right, that's great. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So next, nurturing the adult-child bond. We support adult caregivers in their chosen role, which may include play partners, observers, learners, or mentors. Countless studies highlight the importance of adult-child interactions in learning environments. A child who benefits from interactions with an adult caregiver will be more engaged in learning. Adult-child learning has been tied to positive cognitive and language development. It is common for educators to think of one type of interaction as the best. This is typically idealized as direct and enthusiastic play with the child. But recent studies into supportive adult-child interactions suggest that there are many ways that adults can be supportive and encouraging of their child's learning, and not all of these techniques may look like what we expect. It is also important for us to understand the world of the adult caregiver. A family's needs extend well beyond the fun and engaging learning experiences they may have at the museum. Young children especially create demands on a caregiver's time and energy. Snacks, naps, diaper changes, tantrums, conflicts with other children are all part of a child's life. And just getting them organized, collected, and to the museum can leave a family exhausted. A docent that understands all of this will be better prepared to interact with families in thoughtful and understanding ways. This leads to happier visitors, and happier visitors will have better experiences. Adults likely represent at least 50% of your audience, even if you are in a child-focused exhibit. Keep that in mind when you are working with families. Adults should be engaged too. They will then be that much more likely to be your ally in providing positive experiences for the children. And remember, families are more than just parents and children. Family units can have caregiver aunts, uncles, grandparents, godparents, cousins, and older siblings. Treat every group that comes in to engage together as a family that it comes in to engage together as a family and respect the role the caregiver is playing. Invite those caregivers to engage with their children in whatever manner they are most comfortable. Remembering that parenting and caregiving styles are not for us to dictate, but rather to support. So what are some ways that we can support the caregivers? When facilitating an activity, be aware of the roles caregivers can play, including ways they can support their child's learning. Engage in the activity themselves or actively observe. Directly invite caregivers to participate and let them choose how they want to participate. This lets them know they are welcome to join, but in a way that is most comfortable for them. Support families when children and/or caregivers are having a difficult time in the museum. For example, tantrums, wet clothing. Kids do love to jump in the puddles that we have on grounds. Accidents. Remember, caregivers need our support. Coming to museums with young children can be difficult and exhausting. As with most things, it can be beneficial to think through example scenarios to prepare yourself. So that is why we have another activity. So this is the same as what we did before. There are two scenarios here. If you want to take a few minutes, choose one and think about ways that you can support the caregiver. Does anybody need more time? So, first scenario. A 4-year-old girl has taken a toy away from another child who is on the ground crying. Does anybody have some suggestions about supporting the caregiver?
I would, make kind of what I call a comic problem here,
Mhm.
and say to the kids, "Oh, what's the problem we have here?" And then ask, "Moms, could you help me out and figure out how we can solve this?" I don't want to be the one who plays policeman here. I just
Right.
want to draw attention to it and let the moms do their job.
Right. Nope, and that's a good point. It is, you are not there to be the disciplinarian. You really are there to offer support to the caregiver in difficult situations. Anybody else?
I think you could, oops. I think you could offer the child that's crying a different toy or a different activity, or do they want to be a helper for you to do something else?
That's a really great idea to have them be a helper, because that will make them feel special, and you're distracting them and redirecting them from that toy. Anybody else?
I think the key is to distract that crying child. I mean, really, that's the key here, and
Mhm.
support the mother that way.
Great.
Not be a disciplinarian at all.
Right. Correct.
I think just to kind of jump back to Brian's comment, for me, it's always, I agree, it's always important to enlist the support and assistance of the parents as your referees in this situation. And, never say never, but in the 14 years that I've been doing this, I've never once encountered a parent who would tolerate those kinds of shenanigans from their kid with a kid they didn't know. So more often than not, if it happens, I kind of go into an active observation mode, and I wait for a few seconds to see if the parent has noticed what is happening and intervenes to fix it. The parent of the kid who snatched the toy specifically. If they don't, it may be that they didn't see it happen. And I might just quietly go over and explain and say, the reason this child's crying is because your son just snatched a toy out of his hands. Can you help me out?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, that has actually happened to me before. And they've said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And they say, "Give it back."
Mm-hmm.
And I find that I can often, if I can make sure the parent is aware of what's happening, their desire to get along and be in harmony with the other guests will motivate them in a positive, corrective way.
Right. Great. Okay. So, number 2, a parent and their 2 children have spent quite a while playing in your exhibit and have really been enjoying themselves. The parent is trying to get them to clean up and get ready to leave, but they don't want to go. This happens a lot in the Children's Museum. They love being in there. And a lot of times, the only time you have tears is when it's time to go. So do you have any advice to help the caregiver?
Well, I would ask the caregiver what they were doing next. And, if they say going in the car and going home, that wouldn't be a great thing because they wouldn't want to go. But you might, if it is something like going to the playground, the toy boats, or we're going to the wood exhibit or whatever, I'd say, "Oh, that is so exciting. Why don't you guys clean up and then you'll be able to get there quicker because it's really great."
Great. Anybody else?
Sometimes I've said, I'd look and see if they're a member, and I'd say, oh, I know it's sad when you have to go, but you know what? We'll be here when you come back next time. You know, there will be a next time. Sometimes giving them something to look forward to is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I would just add that if you have this situation, you should take a selfish moment and be proud of yourself and pat yourself on the back, because that means they had a really
It's
good
true.
time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this section? Okay, moving on. So the next section is respect for families' cultures. We employ an array of skills as we interact with families with a variety of backgrounds, needs, and styles. So Eric and I were chatting specifically about this topic yesterday. This is a huge topic that has many complicated and important facets. It's not possible for me to cover this entirely in this particular training session. So we both agreed that this topic needs its own space to unpack fully in a future training session, which we will do. However, it's still important to keep it in as a topic to touch upon in today's training. We live in a highly diverse country, and our urban communities especially reflect a growing diversity. Most museums aim to serve a culturally diverse population, but often default to one style of teaching and interacting. A better understanding of who your visitors are and the different values that they bring to the museum will help you to better serve and communicate with your audience. And a reflection on how you can serve all different kinds of visitors will lead to a more welcoming and more positive interaction with your visitors. Despite the diversity that our visitors might bring, they certainly have at least one universal need, and that is to be treated respectfully and with understanding. You can do this by being welcoming and speak and act comfortably with persons from all cultural, racial, and ethnic groups. It can be helpful to be aware of your own cultural assumptions when observing how families interact within the museum. Modify activities and situations to allow visitors to participate regardless of their cultural beliefs and practices. It's really important to be able to adapt. When you see the opportunity, invite visitors to share firsthand experiences that reflect their cultural background, if they offer to do so. We need to be aware of cultural differences and to be sincere in our attempts to include everyone, but understand that it's okay to make mistakes. Use this as an opportunity to learn. And like I said, there is so much more to this topic that we'll cover in its own training, but I did want to touch upon it briefly here. If anybody has any questions or comments. Okay.
Well, I'm just saying, my experience, again, in the drugstore has been that there are, and usually the people are dressed in a way that indicates what their culture is.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to adjust, but I'm dealing from a position of ignorance. And so when you do this, respect for families' cultures, perhaps you might entertain having some people from those particular cultures or present things that we should be aware of that would improve our interaction with them. I don't know whether to talk with, in some groups, I don't know whether to talk directly to the females or I should talk to the male or to describe certain features in the drugstore or not. And so I've had difficulty with these groups.
Great. And I understand what you're saying. I think it's a really great idea that as we look towards more in-depth training on this, to include people from various backgrounds. You can't really train people on things that you yourself don't practice or aren't aware of. And I would say if you're in a situation where you don't know what's appropriate, don't make assumptions. Just treat them like you would anybody else who comes in. If you would talk to, you know, that person when they came in, whether they be male or female, do it. And if somebody corrects you, then you have that and you learn from that. But it's always best to not make assumptions and default to treating people the same. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay, exemplary play and learning facilitation. We model positive, educational, creative, and respectful ways to interact with children and their caregivers through play. Play, as you can see, is a very big part of this. Learning, understanding, and appreciation are hallmark goals of most museums. You serve as facilitators of that learning, that understanding, and that appreciation. But you can also model for families what quality engagement and informal learning looks like in the museum and at home. Developing the skill set necessary to be a successful facilitator can take time and thought. It is one thing to be there to simply answer questions. It is another skill entirely to spark curiosity and discovery. So where do you start? Follow visitors' leads and cues, knowing when and how to intervene to support play, learning, safety, and enjoyment. Recognize when it is best to step in and when it is best not to interrupt. Actively listen to what children have to say, asking open-ended questions that help them form connections to prior knowledge and form new connections. Redirect play when it is unsafe or inappropriate, providing positive alternatives and seeing families through that transition. What we do in the museum is intentional, but we are open to learning from our visitors. The role of the docent is to support family learning. Sometimes that means stepping in and interacting with the family, and sometimes that means stepping back and not interrupting. And I think that goes for interpretation in general as well. It's very important when you're interpreting to be aware of visitors' cues. You know, you may have information that you really want to get across to them, and you could be in the middle of telling them, and their body language is kind of saying, I really want to go somewhere else. Let them. Don't fight it. Just wrap up the conversation. And, you know, same thing with families. If they're learning and they're playing and you're watching them and maybe you think, oh, they're not doing that the right way, feel free to try to engage and step in, but pick up on the cue and respect it if they don't want your help. Does anybody have questions? Eric, did you want to mention anything about open-ended questions?
Sure. So
I know that's a topic you like.
well, yeah. So I mean, there's definitely a skill to posing good questions, and it's something you have to do intentionally and kind of work at and refine. But the number one rule I always follow when posing any question to a child is that it is not a yes or no or a right or wrong answer question. Hence the idea of it being open-ended. And I try to frame it around asking them to do two things typically. Observation, be it through looking, touching if they can, maybe even smelling or listening, and then maybe a process of deduction. So can they use their observation to then deduce something about what they're looking at, as in, what is it? What would it be used for? Why is it important? Things like that. And that's something that you kind of figure out through trial and error. There are certain things in an exhibit that really lend themselves to that kind of dialogue and other things that don't. But it can be really fun to ask a child what they think about something. Because a lot of times, if you put yourself in a child's shoes, most grown-ups aren't too interested in what kids think or have to say, because we're too preoccupied with our own problems. So if the gift of your attention and interest in what a child thinks is very precious, and they recognize that. The other thing that is really hard for us as adults is giving a child the time to formulate an answer to your question. And, you know, it's something that I think Fred Rogers understood very well, which is that when you're talking to a child and you ask them a question, silence is okay. I know that as an educator and now as a parent, my natural inclination is to ask a question and then answer it right away. Like, what do you want for lunch today? Would you like some lima beans? Would you like some chickpeas? Would you like some peanut butter on a sandwich? You know, but what's really important is when you ask a question to a child, give them the time to think about an answer and come back to you, and let that silence sit for a while. And more often than not, you will get an answer. Just gotta give them time to get there.
Thanks, Eric. Any questions? Okay. So, next topic, play and learning for all. We recognize and can adjust for each individual child's and adult's cognitive, physical, cultural, and social differences. Just as your visiting families represent a diversity of cultures, so too do they represent a wide range of abilities and needs. Some of that range is reflective of age, some of physical ability, some of cultural or social mores and beliefs. Such a range can make it challenging to best serve each visitor that comes through your door. The best thing you can do is be adaptable. People's intelligence is multifaceted. Everyone learns in a different way. Be prepared to adapt to children who are at different levels of expertise or need different entry points. When possible, use various forms of communication to invite visitors to engage. Sight, language, music, smell, touch, movement, etc. Be prepared with adaptive materials and strategies to assist visitors with disabilities throughout the museum. This last point is one of the most important, and at this point I will share a personal story to highlight why. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with Meniere's disease. It is a vestibular disorder that affects several things, but most noticeably, it affects balance and hearing. I first noticed that I was having problems when I woke up one day and suddenly couldn't hear as well out of my left ear. Fast forward 3 years, several treatments, and 2 surgeries later, and I am now completely and irreversibly deaf in my left ear. Being hearing impaired can be incredibly isolating. It is not a visible disability, so I often have to explain that I am hearing impaired if I am struggling in a situation. And there are some cases where people don't know how to react, so they are noticeably uncomfortable, or there have even been times when people will outright ignore me after that. I have even been told, oh, never mind. When I am in a situation where someone picks up on my hearing impairment, or even when I tell them, and they then just adapt to include me by speaking clearly, facing me directly, and speaking up, I feel like I am part of that situation again. Everyone wants to be included, so we need to do our very best to make that happen. Does anybody have questions or comments on this one? And I do think this particular topic is something that a lot of museums can struggle with, a lot of public places can struggle with, to be accessible for everybody. It is an ongoing situation, and it's always changing. And it can be hard to see what the challenges are if you're not in that situation. So I encourage you, if you notice something or a way that something can be improved or made easier for people, to let us know, because it does matter, and we do want to make it all accessible for everybody.
I had a similar experience, Liz, when I was working in a local orchard. I was helping groups of people get off the wagon that was bringing them to the area. And I'm also deaf in my left ear. And unseeing to me, because I was helping people get off the carriage, a lady approached me from my left side and was asking me questions, and I didn't hear her. Another person she was attending that was with her approached me and was saying that I was being very rude. And so I turned and for the first time saw her. Now, she happened to be wearing a burqa. And so I made it very clear that I am so sorry. I couldn't hear you. I don't have hearing in my left ear. How can I help you? I'm glad that individual approached me, because otherwise it would have given a very bad impression of the orchard and the people that work there. So it's very important to be mindful of that, and not to be embarrassed by explaining to people that. And it's nice that they ask you, because then it gives you a chance to explain the situation.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's also something to keep in mind as you're working with visitors, that if somebody doesn't respond to you, there might be a reason. So don't just assume that they don't want to talk to you or they're not listening. You really never know what's going on. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, my experience, again, has been that a lot of the people don't speak English, but you have, or fluently. And so that's one of the important things about making the welcoming statement, is that you can see how people respond to that. And some of them just don't understand what you're saying. And then it clarifies the situation. So you do a different approach for explaining the exhibit.
Right. Right. And so if you have a family who doesn't speak English, you can do your best to communicate through gestures, props, things like that. And it's also very important when you're speaking with visitors to make sure that you're looking directly at them, you're facing them, that you are articulating, you're speaking clearly. Masks make things infinitely more difficult. But, in the time before the masks, making sure people could see your mouth moving is also important. I don't have any good advice for working with masks. It's difficult. As somebody who's hearing impaired, I actually wear a pin on my mask that asks people not to take their masks off when they talk to me, but that I am hearing impaired, because people's reactions a lot of times are to take their mask off to talk to me, which is not a good reaction. So if there's no more questions, we can move on to the next one. Making learning visible. We provide opportunities for families to witness and talk about their learning and experiences. Wait a minute. Aha! That was the one I just did. Sorry, guys. I got myself mixed up. Here we go. Sometimes play looks just like play. Some adults can remain unconvinced that the natural inclination of children to playfully engage with materials and experiences is anything more than diversion. But when caregivers are made aware of all that their child is learning and the skills that their child is developing through their experiences in the museum, it gives them a new appreciation not only for the museum, but for their child as well. When that understanding is shared with your visitors, it can transform the museum from a fun afternoon to a thing of value and to an experience that they will seek to revisit. How can you do this? Share your excitement about children's achievements with everyone in the family, including the child and caregiver. Use conversation to enable adult caregivers to see and appreciate children's learning as well as their important role in that learning. Spark conversations among family members, asking questions like, did you ever do this when you were a child? Why do you think your mom is smiling? Sharing with parents what their child is learning can offer a new sense of appreciation for their child, investment in an activity or program, and a greater likelihood that the learning will continue at home. So this is also, asking the questions, did you ever do this as a child? Is also, it's a great way to get the entire family involved in the conversation. And for children to learn about past generations, it is great when you see families sharing stories from their own childhood, their own past, using items that are in your exhibit. This happens a lot in Stone Store. And, that creates memories for families. Does anybody have questions?
The nice gentleman who had the exhibit from Centerbrook Architects on his chair project told me there were 4 chairs at the beginning of the entrance to the ramp at the Collins Gallery that people were more than welcome to sit at. And he said, just have them come in and sit in those chairs. When people first came into the exhibit and they were looking over at the chairs, they all looked so unique and crazy. And I said, go ahead and go sit in those chairs. And the kids were the first to run up to them and sit. And I said to the parents, why don't you all go see which ones you like best? And they all did. And they were taking pictures and laughing and talking about them. And then by the time they circled to the other side, there were more chairs for them to actually sit. And the whole families were enjoying this experience. And it was nice that the gentleman who was made the chairs or had the chairs on display said, everyone just enjoy them and sit in them.
That's a really great example. And think about if you hadn't been there, or if there hadn't been somebody there to talk to them about the chairs, they would be just chairs. So engaging with that family turned it from them looking at chairs into a family experience and a family memory.
I also think, when I'm thinking about my time on the Morgan, that it would be something that would be useful for me would be to suggest reading stories that the kids could read, or maybe that the family could go on a whale watch or something to extend their, like you said, extend their experience.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yep, it's a really good idea. Okay. Now we can move on to this. Extending learning beyond the museum. We engage in strategies that help museum experiences resonate after families leave, providing resources, ideas, or inspiration for extending learning beyond the museum visit. Our goal with visitors is to inspire and excite in a way that sticks with families that visit us. Real and sustained impact also occurs after a museum visit, if the experience they had manages to kindle a desire for more and greater discovery. Connecting experiences to families' everyday lives contributes to buy-in. If families understand why what they are learning about matters in their own lives, they're that much more likely to be invested in the experience. They need it to be relatable. You can create personal connections with families, understanding how important this can be to learning. Help visitors put words to their experiences. Suggest ideas for follow-up activities to visitors that use affordable and available items, especially things that they may have in their own homes. For example, when the quarantine first started, we were doing a lot of things virtually. And one of the things that I did was make several different Sailor's Valentines out of things that I had at home. So thinking about that, if you're in an exhibit that has a Sailor's Valentine, you can extend the learning to home by challenging the child and the family to come up with a craft using what they have to create something similar. which will be very appropriate in our upcoming exhibit, Sailor Made. There will be lots of opportunities, I think, in that exhibit for families to take information projects, ideas home and do them. Museum learning is reinforced and extended when it is recalled and shared once families leave. Conversations that start in museums often extend beyond the length of the visit. So it's good to know that other connections that you can make in your exhibit, other places in the area, resources, Marilyn, like you said, books, going on a whale watch, just so that once they leave the museum, they're still thinking about their experience and maybe taking it a little bit further. Any questions or thoughts?
Well, I like that craft idea, especially with the holidays coming up, to challenge the kids maybe to make their own gifts for people
Mhm.
if they're interested in something like that.
Mhm.
Something I like to do is to, once the kids have realized that the time frame we were presenting, that the people had certain needs, they had certain resources, but they've changed. So what in your life that you think is so common today, do you think, what will it look like 50 years from now?
Mhm.
Will it even exist? The cell phone, just to get them thinking about how we've all adapted through the years to many
Right.
different challenges, and they're going to be part of that.
Right. Right. It's a really great thought. Okay. So this is our last topic, reflective practice. We engage in an ongoing professional improvement process that includes reflecting on successes and challenges, setting personal goals, and monitoring growth. So what is reflective practice? It is taking a realistic look at your abilities and weak points and think about how you can improve. Why is it important? It leads to more thoughtful and intentional interactions with our visitors. So what can you do? Build upon your strengths and seek to improve your weaknesses. Know your own personal style of engaging with families and play to your strengths. Be open to constructive feedback from others. Set goals and look for ways to improve. Learn and grow from mistakes. They happen. Assess what happened and how you can improve. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. The last statement applies to everything we do here. Don't be afraid to ask questions, make suggestions, or ask for help. We are here to help you. Do you have any questions? Anything anybody wants to talk about, suggestions? So these are very brief introductions to these topics. There is a lot more that we can go into, but it can be overwhelming, all the information. So, and you aren't always going to be in an exhibit where it's going to be play heavy. In fact, a lot of times you won't be. So it can be challenging, I think, to find ways to engage with families. And I encourage you to talk to each other and to talk to us. I'm always interested in hearing stories of what works and what doesn't.
I have a question. Is there any thought to putting placards on some of the things on the Morgan, like this is the mizzen mast, this is the forecastle, this is that, this is a dead eye, this is, or this is the tri-works. Not everything, but some of the major things. Is there a reason why there aren't placards or there couldn't be placards?
I would imagine it's because we have somebody to ask. So I imagine, didn't feel the need to put them on there because they could talk to somebody. I think there used to exist a brochure that had them in there. But
Yeah.
Eric, you can,
Yeah, back in 2014, when the restoration was complete, there was a self-guided tour brochure that had and there were placards placed, numerical placards placed around the vessel to aid in identification. And then a couple of years ago, the decision was made to discontinue that brochure because A, not a lot of people were using it, and B, the printing costs were significant. But I think we're always looking for ways to make it easier to understand what folks are looking at. So maybe there are some ways we can play around with either labeling or some kind of a collection of images that can serve as a helpful interpretive aid there. So I get what you're talking about. There's a lot of terminology and a lot of
There
things
is.
about ship designer, kind of esoteric and unusual.
Okay, thanks.
anything else, or didn't quite use the 2 hours. I didn't think I would. I'm a fast talker, so if you ever need me to slow down, let me know. And if you have questions, I'm here.
I have a question about, I had an adult caregiver of a senior, an elder woman who definitely had, a problem, and she was repeating herself, and her caregiver, her daughter, her older daughter, was making excuses for her, but I didn't think it was necessary because I understood that she was repeating herself over and over again. Is there going to be another topic or another day that we discuss other people aside, families that have children, but families that have other people that have problems that need to be addressed?
Absolutely. Yes. I would like to do a training on working with all visitors, visitors with special needs. Definitely.
I know even with the ramp situation at the Collins, people look at it like, how am I going to handle this? And I have had people carry strollers down the stairs, and I say, please just leave your stroller here or walk down the ramp again. It's okay, because there's direction there. But people are kind of afraid to walk the opposite way if they can't, if the arrows point. So I gently explain it to them that
Right.
you can turn around and come back this way. But it's the elder parents that I know it's a wonderful place to take somebody, because they can maybe relate or understand or feel a comfort in seeing the older ways of life. And I think that might be a good subject to discuss.
Absolutely.
Call from Flaherty, Macon.
Okay. Well, then I think we're good. We are just about half an hour short, but we're good.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you all coming and spending this
Thank
time
you,
with me.
Liz. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks,
Have a
Liz.
good day.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow. See you tomorrow for our session on ships and shipping in the 19th century.